Hello and welcome to episode 25 of Friending the Mirror. Today's episode is called Vision versus Sight, a Mixed Perspective. Most of you probably don't know this, but for the last 5 years, my husband Ian and I have been taking a cruise called the Rock Boat, which is basically consists of 1,000 fans and about 30 rock bands. Now, I'm a huge Carbon Leaf fan, and that's why we started going. But even when they're not on the boat, we go anyway. And it's become very much of a family. On the rock boat 3 years ago, I met a man he and his wife were also on the cruise, and that was their first one. And we got to talking. And for the next 3, actually, he's been on 3 total. We see each other once a year on the rock boat, and we get together and we chat. Now, what makes this man a little bit interesting and unusual is he's blind. So my guest today is David Furukawa. David Furukawa is a world traveler. Despite having retinitis pigmentosa, a retinal degenerative disease. He started out with reasonably good vision, but gradually over the years, it has declined at first to tunnel vision, then progressed to where he can only see shapes and movement. He recently retired from Emory Healthcare, where he worked as a staff physician's assistant in the Department of Ophthalmology. Yes, that's right. He worked with other patients who had eyesight issues. In Dave's own words, "For years, I have seen and talked with patients who seem to have lost interest in the best meaning of life. Laughter, fun, and adventure are some of the greatest components to the secret of happiness. There is far too much negativity and reason to dwell on what is wrong in life. So why not focus on the ride of your life?" Dave does not allow his impaired vision to prevent him from seeing the world. He just perceives it. He just perceives all its wonders in a different way. So today I'd like to welcome Dave Furukawa, also known as Dave the Blind Guy. Welcome to the show, David. How are you doing today?
Hello, Don. Thank you. I'm doing well.
Great. Well, it's so much fun to finally have you on. I know I've been trying for a while to get you on as a guest. Technical
Absolutely.
difficulties aside.
Yes.
So my first question for you is, what is retinitis pigmentosa?
Well, as you so appropriately mentioned, it's a retinal degenerative disease whereby it's a slow progressive loss of sight from the retina itself. Most of you might have heard of the condition called macular degeneration, which affects senior folks, whereas retinitis pigmentosa is the opposite. In macular degeneration, you lose central vision, but you still have peripheral vision. Whereas with retinitis pigmentosa, you lose peripheral vision and it slowly encroaches into your central vision, leading finally to where you're blind. So, you know, it's an interesting disorder because you have plateaus of vision where you lose certain I guess activities of daily living, but you're able to cope with it until the next plateau.
So I know it's really progressive. So does it continue to be progressive? I mean, are you going to lose more than what you've lost already?
Conceivably, you know, as the retinal cells, aka the rods and the cones, die, eventually I'll lose the ability to see light and dark, and that's the final stage. However, I'm very optimistic, having worked in medicine and research, that in my lifetime they'll have a treatment or a cure for my and many other retinal disorders such that, hey, I might even be able to drive again, as scary a thought as that is.
I know during one of our tests, we actually talked about driverless cars.
Oh, yes, yes. But
I
my
don't
wife
know.
promised me a sports car if they ever restore my eyesight. So I'm looking forward to actually being able to drive a Porsche or a BMW.
Well, that sounds exciting, and believe me, you would deserve it. So that is definitely a goal. So hopefully the medical community will get on the stick and get that done for you. So what was it like for you? Like what age did this start? Did you start noticing a difference? And what was it like for you to gradually lose your eyesight?
Well, that's a very good question, Don. I guess I was formally diagnosed at about age 23. I was headed to medical school and I saw an ophthalmologist, and he kind of looked at the floor. It's one of those things where doctors, when they have bad news, don't always like to look you straight in the eye. And I knew something bad was going on. And he said, I've got, you know, bad news. And I said, well, what is it? And he goes, well, you're probably going to go blind. And I was like, what? And he told me you have a condition called retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. And of course, you know, being just out of college and heading to medical school, I didn't know what that was. So I went home and looked in a lot of my textbooks, and then, you know, there it was, this, you know, progressive um, disease. So at that point, I dropped 10 and punted, and I ended up deciding, because of a good friend of mine, become a physician assistant instead of being a medical doctor, because I could get out of school in half the time it would take to become a PA. But knowing that my eyesight would gradually, you know, deteriorate, you know, definitely had positive and negative effects, quite obviously. As my sight declined to the point where I wasn't able to, say, drive anymore, you know, that took quite a bit of time to deal with, both mentally and physically, as far as finding transportation to and from work and out socially. And then when I finally started to have to use a cane because walking around was difficult, you know, the stigma attached with having a, you know, an aid meant that you were kind of, you know, you stuck out in public. And not only did I have to deal with it, but my friends and family did as well. But to their credit, they did an amazing job. And then as the vision continued to decline, um, I ended up to the point where I started having difficulty reading regular print. And after that, it got to the point where I couldn't hardly see faces. And then when the vision in my good eye finally went, I wasn't able to really read print even when it was magnified. So that was when it was when I decided it was time to retire and go do other volunteer and uh, social activities.
So how long of a process was that? I mean, if you were diagnosed at age 21, when did you reach the point that you retired that it was significant enough that there were certain things you felt you could no longer do?
All right. About 25 years. I'm 51 now, so I retired when I was 48. Of course, all my friends are envious, obviously, that I'm retired, stay-home dad. But you know, needless to say, that took quite a bit of adjustment as well. You know, not being in the workforce per se, as I was so dependent, if you will, on my patients. Because actually, I used my practice as a sort of support system, whereby as I saw patients with their vision problems, and I listened to them, upset about, what their vision loss was, that helped me to kind of, you know, basically deal with my vision loss as well. So, it was a give-take relationship, but it was positive for both, I hope.
Yeah, that actually was going to be one of my questions is I was going to ask you about your support system. Now, you didn't have to deal with this growing up. So you didn't have to deal with this basically until you were in college. But how was it for how was your support system in terms of, like you've already mentioned that your parents were a big support for you, and you mentioned about your friends and family. Could you kind of qualify that a little more about how did your friends and family contribute to this process?
Oh, sure. Well, I didn't mention it earlier, but retinitis pigmentosa is a genetic disorder. Even though we've had my entire family checked and no one manifests the disease. So one scientist said that I was a mutant, which was a little disconcerting.
Okay.
But at any rate, I think it was hardest on my mother because she felt like probably the genetic defect was passed maternally. So she had a little bit of guilt issue, but they always treated me normal. In other words, they let me do what I needed to do and what I wanted to do without too much coddling. And my friends were the exact same way. I'm a Civil War medical reenactor, which is very unusual. And my friends in that hobby, they keep an eye out for me. So using their peripheral vision, which I don't have, they make sure I don't fall into a ditch or run into a tree or whatnot. But they also let me do my own thing. So it's a very supportive but very pleasurable kind of network.
I have a photo as your uniform for the reenactment, and so I just put that up so people could see you and all your.
And I might add, I appreciate you saying uniform and not costume. So many people say, "Oh, that's a great costume," and it's like, this is an exact reproduction of an actual uniform that was worn from 1861 to 1865. So that was kind of a joke between my wife and I, Kate, calling my stuff costumes.
Well, we also got to see you in that photo with a beard and a mustache as well.
Oh yeah. My wife hated that goatee. I told her I wasn't going to shave it off till 2015, which was the end of the sesquicentennial battles of the Civil War, but she got the better of me and I shaved it off in 2014 instead, before I got on the rock boat.
So you mentioned now, do you have other members of your family that you know of that have this condition, or are you the lucky one?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I'm the mutant. I'm the only one. And we've checked my brother and sister, 2 cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, parents, nobody has it. So either it was just a very recessive gene, or nature dealt me a trick hand and I was the only one, or the lucky one, as you said.
Yeah, I know that because I've kind of I was the lucky one in my family. Of course, nobody really knows for sure whether my tumor that I had was genetic or whether it was just one of those things that happened. And I'm sure that my parents felt a little guilt for that. That even though it's just one of those things, parents feel responsible, even when there's absolutely nothing they could do. The best they can do is what they have done, and that is be supportive and not call.
Interestingly, when being a PA in ophthalmology, I remember I had a patient come in that needed eye surgery, and she was only like 6, and she had the same eye condition I do, and the parents were devastated. And they wouldn't let her ride a bike. They wouldn't let her, go run out and play because they were worried she was going to hurt herself. And that's when the light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, you got to let her be a 6-year-old. If you hold her back, she's not going to develop in the right way. And when she's an adult, she's going to be stunted, whether emotionally or, physically. So, I think that's probably the best advice I have is, let your children or let your loved ones do for themselves as much as possible, but keep that, peripheral vision on them to make sure that you're not doing anything dangerous, but, let them live their lives as they see fit.
Yeah, I definitely understand. And that's one of those things that I also encourage people that are raising children who have any kind of difference. I mean, you, to some degree, have I have a visible difference. Yours is not. I mean, unless people actually see you with a cane or with your dog, they might not even know, or maybe they might guess if you don't make eye contact with them. But you have a hidden, sorry, that's the word I was looking for. You have a hidden disability a large amount of the time. And I guess you are probably very happy that you at least got to have those first 21 years with relatively normal vision.
Oh, absolutely. In retrospect, I am very blessed in that I was able to, play sports, drive a car, basically do everything that a teenager, young adult would normally do with no restrictions. But, I still see others. I have friends that, they're so sheltered, they don't know how to do the laundry, they don't know how to cook, so they really can't live independently, and I think that's a shame.
So speaking of independently, I mean, you're very fortunate you have Kate, but I know you didn't always have Kate. I don't know if you had somebody before Kate, but tell me, what can you do? What areas are you more independent, and what areas do you find yourself having to rely on someone?
Oh, well, I keep house, so I can clean, relatively. And obviously, sometimes Kate says I don't do a great job of dusting, but I vacuum the floor. I
Accidentally on purpose.
I can cook. I can credit my mother for having taught my brother and I when we were pre-teens on how to cook. She, at one point, said, "Boys, I'm going to have you cook dinner once a month, and you have to pick out a recipe, and then I'll buy the ingredients, and you cook it." And it was a big pain when you're like 12 to go do that, but now as an adult, I'm so thankful that she did that, because now I know how to cook things like manicotti and all kinds of stuff. So, but at any rate, I used to mow the grass, which a lot of my friends were like, "How in the heck do you mow the grass? You can't see where you're mowing." And what I did was I took these, those Department of Transportation orange cones. I would put one on one end of the yard, and I'd put another one at the other end of the yard, and I would mow towards it, because my eyesight was just good enough to where I could see that bright orange cone. And then as soon as I got to it, I would move it over 6 inches and head back on the other way. And there'd be occasional times when I would miss a swatch, and Kate would come home and go, "You missed a spot." And I'd go out there and I would.
Boy, what a critic!
But I didn't want to give up my freedom of doing yard work, which I hated doing yard work when I was a kid, but now as an adult, I really love it. It's actually therapeutic.
Well, and I also think that we get challenged by the things that we should not be able to do. So
Sure.
isn't that part of it, just the challenge of it?
It is. It is. You know, in analyzing the motivation of why I do things, I think that having a disability really probably strengthened me internally, in that I kind of felt the drive prove not only to myself but to others that I was just as good or better than they were at doing, you know, normal everyday things. So, you know, as far as me going hiking or, you know, traveling the world, you know, I try not to let that get in the way, so long as I can find a way to adapt such that, you know, I'm not, you know, leaning on people too much.
Now, how long have you and Kate been together?
We've been married for almost 11 years now.
So there was a significant amount of time in which you did not have Kate, and yet you were still traveling.
Oh, absolutely.
Did you
Yeah.
travel by
Well,
yourself?
not typically, no. I mean, you know, obviously I traveled by myself going to work and such, but you know, if I traveled abroad, it was always with somebody else um, that provided, you know, a sighted guide or transportation. But you know, again, it was definitely a case where I had sight in my earlier days because I could see Kate when I first started dating her. So obviously, the amount of help or assistance that I needed has gradually increased. You have to excuse my dogs here. But the amount of assistance that I needed has gradually increased as my sight has decreased. So, you know, when we first got married, you know, I didn't require very much help at all. Like now, it's more a case where I need someone to help me match my clothes to make sure I'm not wearing something that's going to clash too much.
Well, I'm guessing that most of the time you don't have to care.
I don't care, but others do.
Like, oh, well, if you go out, Kate doesn't want to be seen with you. I understand that.
Right. You know, because I have these plaid shorts that don't match anything, and I'll frequently wear it with a striped shirt, and she'll go, no. But you know, what's great about technology and vision is that there are so many apps now that enable you to tell you what colors are and to tell you what things are, and you know, even the barcodes on different, you know, items, you can scan it and it'll tell you the directions. It's amazing. It's just amazing.
Well, I guess in that way, you're fortunate and to have that particular impairment, that you have so many ways to adapt.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
so I was going to ask you, since this is actually a show that deals with appearances and appearance-related issues, how much does appearance matter? How much did it matter to you before your 20s, and then how much does it matter to you now?
Ah, wow. I would say that appearance was very important to me as a teenager, as far as how I looked and as far as how other people looked, um, which, you know, in a vain kind of way, um, you know, our society is such that appearance is so heavily, you know, kind of dictated. But you know, as I've aged, and particularly with my eyesight failing, obviously appearance becomes much less, uh, you know, I guess, important. So, you know, I've learned that, you know, a person's inner beauty and their personality is far more important than what they look like.
Well, and you are definitely qualified uniquely to be able to say that, because at the state you are now, your vision, that is your primary way of, pardon me the term, but judging people. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Yes, I always tell my wife, it's like, you're gonna always look like you're 30 years old to me for the rest of my life.
Oh, I bet she's really sad about that. What? I'm never going to age in your mind? Oh, darn.
That is, unless they fix my eyesight.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a good point. Maybe she might not be as enthusiastic for the technology as you are. So, how do you see people? How do you form impressions of the people that you meet?
Well, tone to me has a lot of importance. You can usually tell if someone is stressed, or you can tell if someone is happy, or if somebody is angry. And based on a conversation, you can kind of get a feel for whether this person is high anxiety, or whether this person is very laid back. I guess that's one of the blessings that God gave me, is that I tend to have intuitive kind of powers, if you will, where through listening, I can usually kind of tell what type person someone is without seeing them physically.
Fair enough. So, what advice do you have for people who interact with you? Like, what are the assumptions that people make, or the mistakes that people make because of your vision impairment?
Yeah, that's great. A lot of people assume that we're helpless and that we can't do anything. Like, I had a case where one time I was at an intersection with my cane, and someone grabbed my arm and basically dragged me into the street, thinking they were going to help me cross the street. And I was like, excuse me, what are you doing? I can do this on my own. And, I think that people will try to do, the right thing, and they try to be helpful. But in some instances, again, like I mentioned earlier in the show, you have to let people do for themselves as much as they're able to or want to do. I was polite to the person, which I want to stress to those out there. You should never yell at someone for doing something like that. They're doing it out of the kindness of their heart, and if you yell at them, then they may not help somebody else. But in the same token, that was a perfect opportunity to educate that person and say, oh, thank you so much for wanting to help me cross the street. I'm perfectly capable with this cane of doing that. So the other interesting thing is that people tend to talk to me louder when I'm in a conversation and they don't know me, which is interesting because I'm not deaf. So, but they think that because I'm blind, I can't hear. So the volume of their voice goes up, and it's very odd. It happens quite frequently. So it's more than just a passing, kind of isolated instance.
It must be some sort of normal programmed human reaction, because I think even those of us who know better, I have to stop and remind myself, okay, wait a minute, that person, the hearing is just fine. So, but yeah, I think it just goes along with assumptions. If you have one thing wrong, you have other things wrong. So I also want to point out. Go ahead.
And they always say that if you lose one sense, your other senses are better. And I have learned that that's not necessarily the case. I think it's more that instead of your other senses getting better, that you're paying attention to your other senses more. So your awareness is heightened, not that they're improved per se.
So also, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but you kind of bumped your computer a little bit and shoved it off to one side. So if you could correct it, I'm not even sure which direction because I'm looking at you from a, yeah, that's better. Yeah, definitely better. Okay.
Sorry, it was the dogs.
Oh, the dogs. Yeah, I have
Yeah.
actually, my friend has a new cat who lives in the room that I do my broadcast from. And every once in a while he's been scratching on something or jumping up. And so I'm like looking around and it's like, yeah, okay, that's it. I'm distracted by the cat. Don't mind me. At some point he may actually make an appearance. So.
Yes. Well, I have Samson right here next to me, who is very impatiently playing with a toy, and I have another dog named Beauregard, who's a little Boston Terrier, and they're trying to grab the toy from each other. So it's never a dull moment. And I have a 6-year-old son, so keeps me young.
Yeah, good. Actually, that was one of the things that I was going to ask you. One of a woman who I was in a book writing program when I wrote my most recent book, Facial Shift, and one of the women in the program, her name is Laura Schreiner. She was raised by two parents that were blind. Her mom had been blind all her life, and her dad was blind actually around the age of 21. And they met at a school for the blind in California. And they ended up raising a family and had 2 sighted children. Laura was one of them. And one of the things that Laura talks about as a daughter of blind parents is that although for the most part she was protective of them, she also tended to kind of take advantage of them. And I was wondering if Will, your son, ever takes advantage of the fact that you can't see.
Again, I'm so blessed in that I'm sure he has thought about using that as a way of, getting his way. But in reality, I think a lot of kids are more sensitive to the fact that their parents have some disability and try to be more helpful. Of course, maybe it's just his age. When he's a preteen or a teenager, maybe he'll completely, revert, and he'll use that to his advantage of hiding from dad or whatnot. But at this point, he's extremely helpful and doesn't try to trick me or hide from me. So it's the dog, actually. I'm a seeing eye dog, and it's the dog. When you take the harness off, the dog knows he's not working anymore, and he takes advantage of hiding. Like I'll go outside and he'll just take off and run, and I'll call him. Sometimes he's playing, so he won't come right away. And I'm trying to look for him, and he might be like maybe a foot away from me, and as soon as I hear him, I'll reach out and he'll run. But that's just a dog playing, right?
So Will is 6, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it'll be interesting to see what happens when he gets a little older. And just because I went ahead and mentioned my friend's book, I'm gonna just put it up on the screen for a second if anybody's interested in reading it. It's called As I Saw It, a sighted daughter's memoir of growing up with blind parents. And I don't have any particular reason for giving it a plug. I just thought it was appropriate for today's program. So it's actually, I've read it. It's well written, and it gave me some really interesting insights. Another thing that's kind of interesting is that it was written, her parents were older, and so this took place kind of in the 70s and 80s, so a little bit earlier on, and when things weren't quite as technologically advanced as they are now. So tell us, go ahead.
We were talking about my son, William. I think one of the things that's bonded us is that almost 3 years ago, we were struck by a car while crossing the street while I was taking him to school. We were about a block away from our house. And, hey, stop. Sorry. I was walking my son to school, and we were in an intersection right at the school, and a car ran a stop sign and hit me and hit my guide dog, Simon. And the car was going to hit my son, but Simon intuitively jumped back in the path and pushed my son out of the way, thereby, saving him from any injury. And unfortunately, Simon passed away as a result of his injuries. I ended up having like a broken elbow, broken knee, and a broken foot. But, I think my son realized how dangerous, it is with certain types of impairments. So I think that heightened his sensitivity towards my blindness.
Yeah, I mean, even Laura mentioned that she was very protective. She didn't understand why people would stare, and there was a lot of assumptions being made, like that her family was poor because that she had two disabled parents, stuff like that. So, just very interesting, and it's about assumptions, things that people think and feel. And I'm glad your son is coming up that way with that kind of respect, and hopefully it'll carry over to not just dad's blind, but here's someone else who has a different form of disability.
I try to tell them that we're super people. So
there you go. Well, in many respects, you kind of are. So I'm going to ask now that you talk about some of your travels.
Oh, wow. Well, I've been very lucky in that I've been able to travel the world, really. My father was in the Air Force, so we lived in Germany. In Germany, I traveled all over Europe. And then as an adult, I've been Mexico, I've been to Europe again, Japan. But more recently, I just traveled. I came back from this past April. I was in Italy for the 70th anniversary of the ending of World War II, where two of my great uncles fought in the all-Japanese American, the 442nd. So I got to travel the battlefields that they actually were at and walk the paths that they were actually fighting on. So it was just amazing. Even though I couldn't see, I had friends of mine that would describe the terrain. Just walking the terrain, was just absolutely incredible. So, I've been to France, all over France, which, I love France. The food, the wine, the people, the perception and stereotype of the French people, I think, is sometimes skewed because you go into the rural areas and they're just so accommodating and welcoming. It's amazing.
Well, and I think people are going to respond in how they're treated. I mean, if you go there and you're respectful, and I mean, not everyone, some people are going to be rude snobs no matter what. But I think for the most part, if you go in there and you are kind, respectful, polite, and not the stereotypical American, speaking of stereotypes, then you're going to be treated decently. I mean, why
True.
not?
But, as a disabled person, they were very accommodating and, very helpful. So
I want to jump in and mention that if anybody has any questions, I know we have a few people watching live, and if you have any questions, feel free to type those into the chat and we'll answer them. I also wanted to share that, like I say, we've done the rock boat 3 times together, and the last time we did a tour of Mayan ruins, and that was this past January. And in fact, I have a photo of you standing on said Mayan ruins. And I remember asking you how you experienced it. I mean, obviously you don't see it. So how do you experience this historical place?
Well, as we were mentioning earlier about your senses, through smell, obviously we're in the jungle of Customaya. Smell the jungle, you smell, and of course through touch, which, I know you're not supposed to touch stuff per se. However, touching through your feet is every bit as important as touching through your hands, right? So as I walked up some of the steps of some of those Mayan ruins, I got a feel for, what it could have looked like, 500 years ago. As a side note, I minored in archaeology, anthropology in college, so I have a love of history and the ancient world. So it was phenomenal that I was able to actually be on a site that pristine, because most of the site was unexcavated. They were still underground. So in the future, they can, I guess, unearth a lot of those different buildings, and they'll still have artifacts there. So, but I probably shouldn't mention this, but I went to Russia many years ago with some friends, and I was in the Hermitage Museum, which is the national art museum in St. Petersburg. And one of the guards noticed that I was blind, so he came over and he beckoned to me, and he said, "Sit." He said, "Here." Well, he didn't say "sit here," but I could tell he meant "sit here." So I sat down, and all of a sudden, two of my friends come running. Get out of the chair! Get out of the chair! And I'm like, "What? What?" Because that's the Romanov throne, you dummy! You're gonna get sent to a gulag. So I got to touch the Romanov throne, which, obviously you're not supposed to do that, but it's one of the perks, I guess, of being blind.
Well, yeah, I mean, one, you didn't really know, and two, I mean, this guy sat you down in it.
Absolutely,
I mean,
I never would have done that had I known, but Of course, the guard was taking an extreme risk on his part. But,
yeah, well, how long ago was that?
2003.
Okay, because I'm just wondering, was that before you started seeing cameras everywhere?
No.
Because nowadays, of course, there's cameras everywhere.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure probably not.
Yeah. So it was probably a little easier to get away with it.
Sure. Yeah, I don't dare do that now, but certainly it was a unique opportunity.
Yeah, no kidding. It's hard to pass something like that up.
And we were in Russia in January, so it was -20 below zero. It was snowing, and everyone's like, "Hey, why would you go to Russia in the dead of winter?" And I'm like, "Have you seen the movie Dr. Zhivago?" It's like, being in Russia in January was like Dr. Zhivago on steroids. All these palatial palaces and, buildings covered in snow, and everyone, wearing their fur hats and whatnot. And then going to Moscow and seeing all these Soviet buildings, with icicles dangling from them and whatnot was just incredible. So even though I probably would never go back to Russia in the wintertime, certainly it was definitely a spectacle of, unique opportunity.
So in other words, that was at a point where you could still see.
Yes, a little bit. I still had the tunnel vision back then.
Yeah. I mean, so you could actually see the snow on the buildings and the icicles.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Otherwise, that effect, if you can't see it, it's kind of lost.
Right. Unless you can touch it.
It's cold. Okay, so actually, one thing that I neglected to mention earlier is that not only has David been on 3 rock boats, but he is a little bit of a celebrity on the rock boat. especially when it comes to one particular band. And that would be Gaelic Storm. And actually, you have a tendency to be a celebrity regardless of what show you're doing. And if you're at a Gaelic Storm show, they have this kind of routine they do with you, don't they?
I swear I don't seek attention. It follows me, but I'm not one that is trying to get attention. But yes, I was at a Gaelic Storm concert, first rock boat I went to, and I have this habit of swinging my cane in the air to the music and high in the air. And the lead singer, Patrick Murphy, shouted out, "What in the beep is that?" He says, "What are you, blind?" And of course, I didn't know what to do, so I said yes, and all my friends said yes, and he just was completely embarrassed. And I guess a lot of his friends and some of the rock boat staff were giving him a hard time. So the next day at the next concert, he called me up on stage, and that's when it all started.
Well, and here is a photo that I actually took on the rock boat of Dave on stage with Gaelic Storm, waving his cane in the air. And yes, you are actually on stage in this photo. Actually, Ken Block from Sister Hazel is on stage in this shot as well. So it's probably like the last show or something. And it's 2015. So.
Oh, yes, yes. I just saw Ken and Sister Hazel just this past week where they played here in Atlanta. And I spoke with Ken at length. So.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna call out Pat Murphy because he enjoyed that routine so much. But doesn't he do that? I mean, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Doesn't he pretty much do that with you every time? Pretend that he doesn't know you're blind and yeah, because he does that on land shows too, doesn't he?
He does, and he's done it when I'm not there, and mentions, "Oh, I've met this guy on the boat, and he was blind," and but it was truly just one of those magical moments where I was at the right place at the right time, and it was because of the accident and other family tragedies, Kate and I needed a diversion, and it was just the perfect, kind of collection of things that happened that made that probably one of our favorite vacations of all time. So, like
well,
the crowds.
I'm going to share another photo, and this is the one of the crowd surfing photos. So here's a photo of Dave being crowd surfing the audience. The guy in the green shirt on the right side of the screen is Pat Murphy. And anyway, so yeah, and everybody in the crowd shouts, "Dave, Dave, 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 Dave." So if there's any rock butters watching this, I know that you totally get what I'm talking about. The rock boat is definitely a unique experience.
Absolutely.
And so, in fact, we were doing rock boat chat before we went live. It's like, wow, I know they're going to be announcing the lineup pretty soon.
Ironically, one of my good friends tried to get me on the rock boat probably 14 years ago when it was only maybe 2 years new. And I was like, no, I'm not going on the rock boat because I'm just going to get hammered and I'm going to make a fool of myself and blah, 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 blah. And, it took, 10 years later for me to finally go on one. And now I'm hooked.
So now you've figured out that you can make a fool of yourself without getting hammered.
Yes. Much to the dismay of my wife, but, it's all in good fun.
So, moving along to, let's see. Yes, I wanted to ask you about, aside from traveling, aside from rock boat, what do you do Okay. We do have somebody have come in with a comment. So actually, I'm going to jump over to that first. We
Sure.
have Jim has written. He said, "Hey, Dave and Don, is stem cell treatment a possibility in helping you recover your sight?"
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're doing clinical trials, primarily in Europe, but I think even in the United States, some clinical trials where they're injecting stem cells into the eye to, hopefully restore some of the um, defective retinal cells. So, yes, that's definitely high on the list. There's retinal silicone retinal chips that they're actually implanting in people's eyes. Um, Technology is still primitive, but the fact that they're taking people that don't see anything, no light perception at all, and they're being able to see what amounts to a light bright, image. I don't. A lot of you younger folks might not know what a light bright is, but basically, it was these pegs that you place into a board, and it would light up, so you could have the image of a flower or the image of a house, and that's what these people are seeing now. So it's truly amazing. And again, as I mentioned earlier, with time, just like with digital cameras, the acuity of the resolution of this type of technology will probably improve dramatically. So that's why I'm optimistic that there will be at least a treatment for me to be able to see again. Albeit it might be like the Terminator, and I might have like bionic sight, but who knows?
Oh, you would love it because I would just be way too cool. Are you kidding?
Yeah, but what happens if you can see through people's clothes? That might not be a great thing.
Well, you're talking about X-ray vision. That's a little different.
Oh,
Sight versus X-ray vision. Yeah, that could be a little embarrassing being out in public. Although you probably just get so used to it.
yeah. Well,
I was going to ask you, aside from traveling, what else do you do? And being a stay-at-home dog and wrestling, or sorry, stay-at-home dad and wrestling with dogs, what do you do with your time? I know you do a lot of community work. So if you could enlighten us about that.
Yes, I'm the president of a civic organization called the Japanese American Citizens League. So it's a civil rights advocacy group, but it's also an education and cultural kind of group. So we try to teach the public and hopefully my son and other younger generations about what it is to be Japanese American. And of course, whenever particular civil rights infringements come out, we have to kind of make a statement about that. Now with all the stuff going on in the Middle East and with south of the border, we have to be a lot more careful about how we perceive people and how we treat people. So, I guess that's a corollary to, my sight as a blind person is that I grew up Asian in South Georgia, where there's only two other Asian families. So I was different, but yet I tried to assimilate into, society such that I didn't feel like I was different. So
Were you
maybe that helped.
were you treated differently?
There were instances where I was, but certainly, by and large, I was treated normally.
And you had mentioned that you went over. Was it a parent that fought in World War II?
Yeah, my two of my great uncles.
Okay, so your family is long term because they fought with the Americans, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So
My
you have a
family,
long term Japanese American family.
right? My family immigrated to the United States right at the turn of the century, like 1904 and about 1905. So to California. So my family, ironically, my family's been here longer than my wife, Kate, who is 100% Irish, who family came here in the 20s.
So that's interesting. Japanese and Irish. That must be, yeah, the dynamics must get fun sometimes.
You know, one of my Irish uncles mentioned to me when we first got married, it said, "Now, boy, when you have children, you're going to be in trouble." And I was like, "Why?" And he goes, "Because the Irish part of us is going to want to pick fights with everybody, but the Japanese part of your kids is not going to want to surrender."
Whoa, okay.
But you know, I'm a reenactor, so I reenact mainly for educational purposes. But I reenact Civil War as a surgeon and a Yankee, no less, in the South. I'm part of a group from the 21st Ohio Volunteer Infantry. You know, I love teaching people about 19th century medicine. I have my bone saws and scalpels and whatnot. And, you know, I try not to gross people out, but teach about, you know, the merits and the, you know, expertise that doctors of the 19th century had. They weren't butchers or, you know, sawbones like they're depicted in the movies. But I also portray a Japanese American soldier from World War I that served with Sergeant Alvin York, and I portray my great uncle that fought in Italy and France in World War II. So I do that to teach the kids about, you know, our heritage.
Yeah, and you do some work for the blind community as well, right?
I have sat on numerous boards. The Foundation Fighting Blindness, which is one of the largest fundraising organizations for conditions like mine, RP, and macular degeneration. And I was the chairman of a vision walk, which was very intimidating, you know, being the quote unquote figurehead of the entire walk for the entire city of Atlanta. But I'm happy to say that it was a huge success and we raised quite a bit of money. So I was off the hook, thankfully.
Well, that's great. You are keeping busy, and you certainly don't. It's not like you're sitting at home feeling sorry for yourself. That's for sure.
No.
And
Yeah.
for that reason, what advice do you have for someone who might be in a similar position as yours, but maybe isn't coping as well? What advice do you have for someone in terms of, well, because you talk about taking the ride of your life. So elaborate on that.
You know, the term vision and the term sight is very ambiguous in that, you know, everyone thinks that vision and sight is only what you can physically see. But in reality, when you look at it from the, you know, more ethereal aspect, vision goes beyond what you physically see. It's what you perceive and how you think. So consequently, you know, I would say that, you know, don't let anyone tell you that you can't do something. I try to stress that to my son. You know, you yourself don't cut yourself short, and, you know, be open to new things, even if they seem, you know, scary or, you know, difficult. Sometimes those are the type of activities that prove to be the most rewarding and fulfilling. So I guess the biggest thing is, you know, look beyond your vision and look beyond your sight, and you might actually really see things that really change your life.
Well, that's really excellent advice. And again, it applies to everybody. It doesn't matter whether they have a facial difference or they have a vision impairment, a hearing impairment. It really doesn't matter. In fact, I don't know how we can top that. So unless you have any final words, I'm going to start the wrap of the show. I want to just thank you so much for taking the time. I know it's been a little bit of a challenge technically to make this work. It's hard when you have to rely on a computer that all it can do is talk to you. But I know we also had some difficulties from the webinar end as well. So I'm very grateful for your patience and for your tolerance and for coming on.
I would like to add one last thing before we close.
Absolutely.
Don't ever let a doctor tell you there's nothing that can be done. I hated that in practicing medicine when someone said that. You should never slam the door in someone's face. You should always say, well, we're very sorry, but there's nothing available at this time. But leave the door open where there's that glimmer of hope and optimism that in the future there might be something that would be able to cure or treat your problem. And I would say keep abreast of the top research facilities where you live. They're the ones that are basically furthering technology and research. So if you keep tabs on those areas, you're more likely to find the next cure or next treatment. And finally, rely heavily on technology, because the amount of technology and adaptive aids that are out there, particularly for the visually impaired world, is growing by leaps and bounds every year. So that's the main limitation to your scope of doing whatever you want to do.
Well, and I want to add something because I have a little bit different perspective about the medical community. It's like, yeah, that's true. I mean, when people say there's nothing that can be done, don't believe it. But also, by the same token, recognize that you always have a choice. I know that I have a surgeon who was like, wow, I can do this great improvement, and it's going to do this, and it's going to make your appearance so much better, and it's going to help this and help that. And he gave me the details, and it's like, no, I don't want to do that. That's way too invasive. So, and I realize it's going to be a little bit different with a facial difference versus an eyesight, but just always keep in mind that doctors are human. And just because one doesn't know something doesn't mean that there isn't somebody else out there who has a different expertise and knowledge. And also know that they're not gods. They don't know everything. And for them, especially, really, it's always up to you.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So is that... Again, Dave, thank you. It's been wonderful having you. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope to see you next year on the Rock Boat.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
I guess we'll see how the lineup shapes up, huh? But anyway, so I want to close the show as I usually do. I want to say that my next webinar is May 11th. And my guest is Crystal Hodges. She's a speaker and a blogger who has a prominent port wine stain. When a photo of her face went viral on Facebook without her consent, she was moved to teach others about the true meaning of beauty. So I'm happy to have Crystal on my show next month. And always keep in mind, while it's important to be kind to others, don't forget to also be kind to yourself.
We are love, we are one. We are how we treat each other when the day is done. We are peace, we are war. We are how we treat each other, nothing more. We are how we treat each other, nothing more. We are how we treat each other.